I'm not old enough to know someone 40 years, so I don't understand how that worked. But I have a memory of when I was growing up and went to church at Memorial, and Terry was the minister, and they lived next door to the church, and so their kids played in the church parking lot all the time. So I always remember Tim and Dusty and Wendy riding a little red wagon around the parking lot, kicking the ball in the parking lot. That was their playground, and he told me earlier they played on the church buses too. I'm not sure anybody knew that. Also have good memories of the Rush family coming over. I think Terry is a big Cardinals fan, St. Louis Cardinals fan, so I don't think they had cable TV and we did, so they were at our house watching St. Louis Cardinals game. I told my mom about that Tim was going to speak tonight, and she said, "Oh, I have great memories of them being there when they were little boys watching the Cardinals games with us." But Tim is from Tulsa. He grew up here. He was in the first graduating class of Wright Christian Academy in 1990. He attended the Adventures and Missions program after high school, which included a 14-month internship in Lisbon, Portugal. Tim worked as an AIM assistant from 1993 until 2000. And during that time, he graduated from Texas Tech with a degree in communications and history, as well as graduating from the Sunset International Bible Institute. He spent 3 summers working with missionaries in South Africa and Russia, and in 1999, Tim married his wife, Kim. That should be easy for us to remember, another Tim and Kim. They have 3 children, Quincy, and then the twins are Carson and Clark, right? Quincy's 15, the twins are 12. In 2003, they moved to Guadalajara, Mexico, where they planted and ministered to house churches for 10 years. In 2012, Tim finished his master's degree in communications from the University of Oklahoma, and then finally in 2015, they returned to Tulsa. Tim is now employed as the equipping minister at the Memorial Drive Church in Tulsa. So Tim, if you'll come on up, we'll say a prayer together, and then you can speak to us. Father God, thank you so much for Tim and his wife Kim and their family. Thank you for his servant heart. Thank you for the time he spent preparing for ministry and serving you around the world and now back in Tulsa. Father, we're grateful for his compassion and the way he served others. And Father, thank you so much that he has been willing to serve those who are so less fortunate. God, thank you for the godly man that he's become and his willingness to be here tonight. Father, open our hearts to the message he brings to us and inspire us with your love. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Well, thank you for letting me come and speak tonight. I really have great memories of this place. Growing up, going to high school, and coming here on Sunday nights on occasion for the Sunday Night Live events when all the youth would descend. Great memories of this place, great memories of a lot of good people from this place. The Maynard family, the Watson family. Feel really blessed to be connected with this church and now with Tim Piles. What an incredible ministry you guys have. If you will, go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 14, and that's where we're going to be in just a bit. I know you've been talking about discipleship. And I love the theme of being all in. I love the theme I love that a church is looking together to see how can we step further into discipleship. I don't think we get to a place where we feel like, yay, now we are good disciples. I feel like it's just a journey. That's all we can ask for, is that each day we try to live a little bit closer into what Christ is calling us to do. But even saying that, I know that we can look at our situation, at our lives, and we can ask ourselves, what's next? Is there something else that God is calling me to as an individual? Or is there something that God is calling us to as a collective body? And so tonight, what I'd really like to do is just put something on the table to consider. Just something that you may ask, is this true about this place? Is this something that we could think about in considering who you have in this place and who you are as a people? But first I want to tell you a couple things about Mexico, and then we'll move into 1 Samuel to tie this together. Moving to Mexico as a missionary, we didn't work with a traditional church setting. We were doing house churches, which meant we would meet in people's homes. And instead of bringing people together where there needed to be professional leadership to move the body forward, leadership didn't work the same way in Mexico that it does in the States. And also needing a lot of U.S. dollars to fund buildings, that wasn't a good thing. We decided for the people there to rely on the U.S. dollar, so they didn't need U.S. dollars for houses, and they didn't need professional leadership for groups of 12 to 25. I didn't need to tell you all of that, but to explain that we were doing house churches there meant we were in places that you wouldn't regularly go on a Sunday morning. There was an area in Guadalajara called Jocotan that the first time we drove through it, and I don't know if you know, Guadalajara is a city of 7 million. So if you think of Dallas, Fort Worth, and you cut it down by a quarter of the size and then double the population, then that's Guadalajara. It's about 7 million people in a very small place. And my teammate, my first week in Guadalajara, was driving us to where we were renting our new offices. And on the way, he took a shortcut and he said, by the way, don't ever come here at night. Because this place, and I don't know that he used these words, but the ones that stick in my head are notorious and dangerous. And I thought, you do not have to tell me twice. I will not be back here during the day. Shortcuts are not a big deal to me. I don't know if you know this yet about God, but He is funny. God has a sense of humor. So when my wife and I went to plant our first church, and it wasn't that we decided this place, it was that a family was saying, would somebody come and study with us? It happened to be in Jocotan. And so not only were we going there every Sunday morning, we might be there on a Friday night or a Thursday night in the dark into a neighborhood that was not well lit, but very, very populated. And as we got to know this family, we found out, very poor family in a very humble setting, we found out that they might be the reason why this was a notorious neighborhood. We were dealing with a brother and a sister and their respective families, and we began to find out that their mother, sometimes when I speak about Mexico, I get emotional, so, I get emotional a lot when I speak, so you may have to be patient there. Their mother abandoned them. It was actually 3 sons and a daughter, and the mother abandoned them to move to another place far away to be with her other children that she liked more. So you can imagine poor, no resources, no parenting, scared, living on the streets, and as they grew older and realized more and more the abandonment that brought them to this place, you can imagine a little bit of anger. And so the people in the area called this family the Rats. Those are the Rats. Those 4 kids are the Rats. And those Rats began to gather other kids around them till they had a gang. And so this gang took this poor area of the city and turned it into a dangerous area of the city. So we were now going into the home of one of the leaders of this gang, and we're taking Jesus to them. What's interesting is, even as they began to walk with Jesus, it didn't mean that there wasn't chaos at their door. It didn't mean that addictions that they had given up, and I'm talking about alcohol and drugs, and in a weird way, violence. It didn't mean that those things were just cured. And this is a whole different discussion of the Holy Spirit and how He works in our lives to give us new luggage to carry instead of the baggage of old. But the violence permeated the family to the point where there was a Sunday morning where, there was one Sunday morning where the husband said in our Bible study time, he and his wife were conflicting, and she was maybe going to leave, and he assured everybody there that if she did, he would kill her and the kids. There was I believe it was the following week, where we had to make a decision not to take our kids to church. We had to leave them with friends because we weren't certain would we be walking into a murder scene. And we weren't certain what we were walking into, but we knew that we had to speak some truth into that situation because of the danger, and so we weren't sure exactly how we would walk out. We didn't know. We knew what we were going to say, and we knew if there was violence, we knew how we would respond. And so, it was a moment of incredible peace, dropping our kids off and driving into this place and praying to God, saying, God, what are you going to do here? And what's crazy is I could tell you stories of other missionaries, some that you know. Brandon and Katie Price. You know where they are at. You know what they are doing in an area that is under siege. Friends of mine that I worked with in Guadalajara, my friend Corey was beaten in front of a place where he ministered at regularly. And he was beaten until he was unconscious and then beaten some more. And the incredible thing about this was when he saw what was coming, he made a decision of how he was going to react. And he decided he was going to turn the other cheek. Now, when he saw what was coming, he thought it was going to be a punch. He didn't know what was coming up from behind that he heard from witnesses later. Or I can tell you about another friend, James, in Mexico City, that spent a night in jail because he wouldn't pay corrupt policemen a bribe. And the story includes a moment where prisoners in jail are saying to him in the middle of the night, hey, could you tell us another story about people in jail in the Bible? Ends up there are a whole lot of those stories. But what I want to ask you is what would cause the Brandon and Katies and the Coreys and the Jameses, what would cause them to step into frightening situations? What would cause them to be okay moving in areas that don't feel safe, but that they feel God is walking them into? And I think something that I can see clearly in my own life is parents that decided how they would respond ahead of time when I would say, I think I want to go do mission work. That I had people around me, my folks and others at church, that decided what they would do ahead of time when they were approached with dreams of faith that weren't exactly safe. And so what I want to ask you tonight is, are you prepared to take that next step in faith? Because in Luke 9 and Luke 14, when Jesus says, count the cost, he starts hitting hard. And he starts saying things like, what priority are you placing on family? He starts putting priorities in areas that start to hurt. And he says, you need to count this cost right now. Because if we want to be all in, if we want to be disciples, hard questions are going to come up. Hard things are going to be asked, and we need to train ourselves to be prepared to know how will we respond. If you talk to the youth minister of these guys down here, I bet the youth minister would have stories of inappropriate behavior and rowdiness and craziness, because that's what all of us did when we were in the youth group. But I bet he has 10 times that many stories of hearts for the brokenhearted, hearts for those who are down and out, hearts of wanting to share something good with those that don't have anything good. And so if you are raising up this next generation of those who will walk in faith, that next generation may ask to do hard things. And so is this body training itself to respond with words of faith and words of hope? This story in 1 Samuel chapter 14, it's one of my favorites, and it's always been a favorite because I see Jonathan take a step in faith to do something that nobody else would do. Now that I'm a father with a 15-year-old and two 12-year-olds, I'm looking at this, at how important the armor bearer is to the story. Now, if you don't know the story, if you start actually in 1 Samuel chapter 13, you see that it's a time of war. You see that the Israelites and the Philistines are going to meet in battle. And the Israelites are pretty proud of themselves. Got 3,000 soldiers ready to go. They know the war songs, they know the chants, and they're ready to get this done until the Philistines show up. And the Philistines have 3,000 chariots and 6,000 charioteers. And it says soldiers as numerous as the sands of on the shore. So you've got 3,000 that are excited until the innumerable show up. And then if you follow through in chapter 15, or verse 15, it says, talking about on the day of the final battle that we'll get to, it says they numbered about 600. And if you get down to verse 22, it says, so on the day of the battle, not a soldier with Saul or Jonathan had a sword or spear in his hand, only Saul and his son Jonathan had them. And if you read into chapter 14, what you see is when those Philistines arrived, and those people who were excited, and they knew all the songs, they knew all the right words, when they were faced with something that would cause fear, they ran, most of them. And not only did they run, well, it says that they ran and they hid in holes in the ground and caves, trying to cover themselves up so they wouldn't be seen. And it says that even some joined the Philistines. Some of them were so frightened by what was to come, they didn't even just run away, they ran to the other team because they did not like what was happening. But Jonathan saw this and decided there could be something better. It does not have to be this way. We do not have to be controlled by fear. I don't know about you, but to me that says something to our culture today. A culture that fear pushes the buttons and fear drives. And one guy said, maybe not. Maybe we don't have to give in to that. Verse 1 of chapter 14, it says, one day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man bearing his armor, come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side. Do you see what it says next? But he did not tell his father. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine doing the hardest thing, putting yourself at death's door and being more afraid to tell your dad what you're about to do? Because he knew his dad was standing in fear. His dad, if you look in chapter 13, he was making decisions led by fear. So much so that Samuel would come and say, man, Saul, I'm sorry, but God's taken his kingdom from you. He can't have a king that is controlled by fear. So Jonathan, verse 6, said to his young armor bearer, come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. And notice the armor bearer's response. Do all that you have in mind, his armor bearer said. Go ahead, I am with you, heart and soul. The servant, the one carrying the armor, or the king, the leader, the grown-up, who was standing in fear. But the servant would say, what do you have on your heart, Jonathan? What is it that you see God is calling you to? So is that a question that we could be asking ourselves? Could we be asking ourselves when our Jonathans step up? Say, man, this is what God is leading us to. Are we preparing ourselves to say, what's on your heart? We will be with you with all of our hearts, with all of our souls. I'm telling you, in Mexico, because I knew my folks were with me, heart and soul, they were okay with their grandkids growing up in Mexico, a very long ways away, because they knew we were trying our best to listen to God. We were trying our best to do what he was calling us into. And I know there were many people at home saying, when are they coming home? When are they going to get out of there? When the Mexican mafia started blowing up buses all around Guadalajara, causing massive chaos, when are they going to get out of there? I never heard that from my folks. I never heard, hey, have you thought about the kids' safety? And those are legitimate questions to ask. But their response was, what are you hearing from God? Where is God leading you? And we are with you. Now, I'm saying that as the son. I'm saying that as the 17-year-old that left home and went to Europe and somewhere along the way happened to fall off a cliff and scare his parents to death, which didn't matter until I lost all my hair, and now the dents look awful funny. But being the 17-year-old or the 30-year-old and doing those things was one thing. Now I have a 15-year-old and two 12-year-olds that look to me like people of faith. They look to me like people who want to follow God. And so now I am the dad trying to train myself. How will I answer Clark? How will I answer my sweet, precious 12-year-old girl, Carson, when she makes a decision about following God? I don't want to be Saul. I don't want to be the one that they can't even come to. I pray and I practice right now being the armor bearer, being the one who will say, is this what you're hearing from God? We may have some questions about that. But when they hear from God and they move in that direction, I want to be with them heart and soul. Do you know how this story ends? Do you remember what happens? Jonathan attacks, and there's really great stuff in here along the way, but in the end he attacks. He kills about 20 of them in an area of, I think it says about half an acre, and it causes a crazy chaos among the Philistines. And not just the Philistines in that war party, but Philistines from all around, so much so that it catches the Israelites' attention. In verse 20 it says, then Saul and all his men assembled and went to the battle. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their own swords. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines and had gone up with them to their camp went over to the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined in the battle in hot pursuit. So the Lord rescued Israel that day. Isn't that incredible? One guy would decide to take a step in faith, and the Lord would rescue Israel that day. One guy would decide to take a step in faith, and the ones who were standing in the battle lines, chanting, singing the songs, but too scared to do anything, they joined the battle. The ones who had ran and hid ran back just as fast to join the battle. And those traitors who joined the other side realized a mistake, came and joined, because Jonathan would do what he believed God was calling him to do. Because he would have one man that would stand with him. Say, Jonathan, I am with you, heart and soul. So the question I just want to put on the table tonight is, what sort of a church are we? What sort of church do we want to be? Do we want to be one that models to our kids fear? Don't come ask us because you know we are already afraid? Or do we want to model to them, man, if that's where God is leading you, we are with you. Oh, you want to do AIM? Wouldn't you rather go to school for 4 years because that's safe? That was one of the things my dad prepared himself for, because that's the question he got. Oh, but Tim will never go to college if he goes to AIM. So then when I went to AIM and came back and went to college, and I came back and said, Dad, I need to take off this semester and spend some time with a missionary in Russia. he had practiced. Is this what you see God leading you to? So, we come to the invitation. I want to ask you, who is it that you want to be? And I know that our Jonathans aren't just sitting right here. I know that there are Jonathans that are called elders. And there are Jonathans that are called ministers. And there are Jonathans that are called mom and dad that want to head into battle where they see God leading them. And so I hope you will be armor bearers for them also. But since we do have young Jonathans in front of us, I want to pose that question tonight. Who would be their armor bearer? Who would be the one that would say, I'm with you? Who would be willing? And there's a risk, okay? There's a risk of saying that. And I understand that because if you say, I will support you and I will help listen to God with you, there's a risk because God might move into territories where you feel uncomfortable. There's a risk that somebody might call you on it and remind you later, you said you would be an armor bearer. But we're going to have an invitation song now. And if there are some that need to just come forward and ask for prayers, that's always available, right? If there's some that want to be baptized, we love that. But if there are any that would just like to say, I'm it. I will support you guys. I will carry your armor. I want to encourage you to, the church needs to hear that. The church needs to hear men and women of faith say, we will listen to God with you, and we will support you, heart and soul. Let's stand and sing.